Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Wednesday talk brought to you by Room to Grow, Sandy and Straight Nature. Before I introduce our speaker, I just would like to get thanks to our sponsors. Firstly, to Straight Nature. Straight Nature is the leading specialist natural history publisher in Southern Africa, associated with the best-selling and most highly regarded field guides in the region. They publish full-color illustrated books across a variety of subject areas, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees and flowers, as well as the marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, as well as children's nature. And this week, Gareth's book is going to be on special, both at the store at Kirstenbosch, as well as online. And then from Room to Grow, my name's Brett, I'm the owner of Room to Grow. We've been designing and installing outdoor landscapes and living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. And we offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction and associated elements to our residential, retail and commercial clients. And you can find out more about us on our roomtogrow.co.za, as well as our socials, Facebook and Instagram. And then it is my pleasure today to introduce Garreth van Niekerk. Garreth has studied architecture, visual communication, linguistics, and classical studies. An unusual combination, one would think, but one that has made him perfectly suited to create this extraordinary book. Not only has he given us a glimpse of his unique interpretation of each creation, he has also managed, through his words, to sketch for the reader a portrait of one of South Africa's most prodigious talents, Patrick Watson, the landscape designer and artist at the center of this book. While this is Garreth's first book, he's no stranger to the world of media and publishing. He is the recipient of several awards and is Media 24 Lifestyle Journalist of the Year, a Standard Bank Arts Journalist of the Year Gold winner, and a finalist and the highly commended writer in the CNN Multi-Choice African Journalist of the Year competition. I'm very excited and so much looking forward to this talk. Over to you, Garreth. Thank you.
Morning, everyone, and thanks so much for the wonderful introduction and for joining us today as we take a look at the incredible man and his work, who I believe is one of South Africa and the world's most innovative and versatile landscape designers, Patrick Watson. In today's talk, we'll explore 7 remarkable Patrick Watson gardens published in my new book on his work called Veld, The Gardens and Landscapes of Patrick Watson. That is now on shelves everywhere. If you haven't got your copy yet, I'd really recommend that you get one, because I must say, I think it's really something special. It's taken us 5 years to do, and we worked with some incredible people and some of Patrick's incredible clients around the continent. And so if you haven't got your one yet, let's quickly take a look at the structure of the book and understand this visionary man behind the landscapes. When we started the process 5 years ago of making this book, we realized how rare the opportunity was to make a book like this. They're really expensive books to produce. They take a lot of time, and because of the scope of Patrick's work, which is really across Africa, we wanted to make a volume that spoke to as many audiences as possible. So for people in the gardening world, Patrick is described as a gardener, a landscaper, or landscape architect. For designers and creatives, he's described as an artist. And for others, he's a philosopher. So we wanted to create an experience in the book that would answer all 3 of those questions. To do that, we broke the book into 3 parts. First is a survey of his work, where we focus in on 23 gardens. Then we moved to a biographical sketch of his life, and then we moved to 7 really extensive plant lists from his gardens across Africa. In the first section, called Gardens and Landscapes, we worked with Patrick to break down his list of almost 1,000 gardens that he's created over his lifetime into something that could tell the story of his body of work. As we went through his archive of images and explored many of the gardens ourselves together, really going from Johannesburg to Cape Town to north into Africa in places like the Seychelles. The theme of the veld came up as something important and a theme in the way he approaches landscape design. For Patrick, he describes the veld as the veld and the practice of the veld as something he's been working with as a child, and that felt is really something he's been doing his whole life. So in this section, photographer Elsa Young and I, Elsa is an incredible photographer who works primarily in architecture and interior photography, but is an extraordinary landscape photographer, as you'll see in this presentation and throughout the book. And we go really from the low veld to the renoster veld to more hypothetical veld areas around Africa, and try and really go inside each landscape and garden to hopefully communicate the feeling of being in one of these spaces and give the big picture and zoom in on the details of Patrick's work that makes each landscape so intricate and layered. From there, we go into a biographical sketch of Patrick's life that explores how he got to where he is today. Patrick's name is synonymous with many things. He holds a very dear place to the landscape and community, and obviously to the people in his life. But excellence in landscape design is really the word that comes up most often when people talk about him. His work often defies simple categorization because each project is unique. He works with each client to really realize something that's realizable and maintainable for them throughout the lifetime of each garden. They range from really grand projects like Sun City to more intimate and contemplative gardens like the Garden of Hope at St. George's Anglican Church in Parktown, which is recently completed. Patrick's designs are really not just about aesthetics. They're this harmonious blend of artistic intuition, his own botanical expertise, which is legendary, and a deep commitment to the conservation and restoration of nature. Many of you might be familiar with his work from iconic sites like the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, and whimsical, quite eccentric gardens like 27 Boxes in Melville, in Johannesburg, just up the road from where I am. Patrick's approach really combines the potential of the natural environment that he's grown up within here in Johannesburg, and the purpose of each garden. Each of them brings quite a unique interpretation that reflects not just the client's brief and their desires for their landscape, but also includes quite an unconventional perspective that he's become really well known for. Professionally, Patrick is self-taught with, like I've said, a really extensive knowledge of plants, horticulture, and natural ecosystems. His passion for the natural world began in childhood and has really only developed and deepened over the years. It's led to him pioneering the propagation of many rare species, many of which have never been used in domestic landscapes before. And quite unique to his project, he's established viable nurseries across the continent. In a lot of the cases, these properties had never really had access to plants that existed in their ecosystem before. And so Patrick works with a team to develop a specific nursery for each landscape that is developed over many years. In projects like Stay in City, Patrick grew over 1 million trees from seed harvested and collected through colleagues and other organizations, growing them from seed and then 10 years later, planting them in the landscape. So his work is not really just about creating these beautiful spaces, but it's about reestablishing ecological systems and thinking in more planetary terms as we live through this Anthropocene. We then go to, apologies, in the plantless section, this sort of ecological focus of Patrick's work really comes to life, where in hundreds of plants listed in this section, he demonstrates his botanical knowledge and commitment to transforming traditional landscape conversations. I hope that in putting this together, which has taken an extraordinary effort, not just from our side, but from the editor of this book, Professor Jane Carruthers, to become a practical reference that gardeners who want to recreate a certain style of garden featured in the book could use for themselves. So I'm going to start our exploration of Patrick's work at Isibindi. It's an enormous project based in Sandton, Johannesburg. This private estate belongs to a family, and they've owned it for many years. And the project draws its inspiration from the Highveld, a project that's deeply woven into Patrick's life, but also into the life of the family who live here. The gardens were commissioned between 2003 and 2005. And they've evolved from what began as quite a traditional parkland design into a showcase of Highveld habitats. In this book, Elsa has, for the first time, photographed many of the gardens using a drone. Patrick is known quite uniquely for not working directly from plans. And so these drone images give quite a rare opportunity for you to see the gardens from above and appreciate the landscapes that, I suppose, from when you're in them feel really naturalized, but from on top you get a sense of how formal and geometric many of them are. The owner's family has a rich history of indigenous garden, and so Patrick worked with them to blend the tradition of the property itself, which is designed in quite, I suppose it references a Cape Dutch sort of style of architecture, with modern conservation and really contemporary landscape design. They exist not really at odds with each other, but in quite a symbiotic relationship that I think is and has made this garden one of my favorites in the book. And for those people who know Patrick, it's often the one that's referenced most often. In this image, you can see in the background of the project, you can see the Sandton CBD right on the footstep of this property. It's enormous, and it's incredible that a property like this exists so close to the city's edge. In this project, Patrick has separated the garden into 3 main areas, each of them distinct but interconnected. First, we have the Highveld Meadow, which is featured here in this image, which is really broken up into these triangular beds that are filled with native species, many of which were rescued from nearby construction sites. It's incredible, really, that Patrick goes to, he drives around the country and around the city, finding sites where these often threatened plants are just being excavated and thrown into piles of rubble. And he goes to the developer or the person constructing the garden, takes plants that are really being thrown away, finds ways to look after them and reintroduce them to the landscape. Often many of these are lost in Patrick's efforts to save them, but a large portion of them are saved. And as you can see, they really just bring the landscape to life so beautifully. From there, the garden has been transformed into, as you can see, from these enormous lawns into a grassland, where this vast expanse of indigenous grasses and seasonal wildflowers have been designed to evoke a feeling of what Patrick describes as an endless horizon. He speaks often about how on his trips around Africa, going to various botanical gardens and meeting really inspirational landscapers and private garden owners, part of what makes a garden in Africa on the continent so remarkable is the sense of an endless horizon. So really, when you're in this garden, from one side to another, it's the gardens kind of never seem to end, and it's an incredible thing to see so intimately. As you can see in this image, an important part of this garden is the restoration of a wetland on the property, which has become really important in the maintenance of this garden, where the water used in this wetland waters the garden and watered the garden in its initial stages. At this stage, the garden is not watered and only watered by hand by the team of gardeners as new plants are reintroduced or planted in the garden for the first time. The actual wetland itself is an incredibly biodiverse region and part of the garden. It's teeming with life from aquatic birds and plants, and it's a really calm and tranquil space to experience as you walk over this bridge that sits on the water's edge. It's incredible. As you walk through the gardens, it's really hard not to be struck by the diversity of plant life that Patrick's incorporated into the landscape. Also, the photographer of these gardens has been visiting Isibindi for 4 years and has photographed it in each season. So in the book, you really get an opportunity to experience how from spring to winter, the landscape is almost entirely different. And the experience of being there is really close to, I suppose, one would experience in the Highveld. It's remarkable and it's breathtaking, and it's home to nearly 600 species of Highveld plants. The garden has been almost choreographed to enter into these phases where color is explored in a really unique way. So at certain points of the year, the garden goes into these waves of yellow and purple, and then the flowers die, and then it goes into this really beautiful brown. So it's remarkable. In the wetland that we featured here, there's really beautiful blue water lilies and the African bulrush, and it sits alongside these quite small detailed plants like orchids, like the Satyrium halakii, that really makes it a haven for wildlife. The grassland itself is famous for mass plantings, and throughout the year, you'll get these amazing blossoms from the plowbreaker, this underground erythrina that's kind of like a giant tree that lives underground, and then at certain points of the year blooms with these incredible scarlet flowers. And at the same time, you'll get the orange water lily, the orange river lily. That's also an incredible sight to see. So like I said, it goes from these really beautiful, fine, detailed plants to more dramatic plants like the pineapple lily. And then there's these quite formal, harsh landscaping interventions, like these incredible grass stairs that I absolutely love. And this is another shot of the wetland, which I think is just so spectacular. These are these orange lilies and orange river lilies and plow breakers, which are these bursts of color as you're walking through the browns of the grasses. You can see these extraordinary scarlet flowers that are beautiful to be around, and this is the bridge that sits right on the water's edge, in this wetland area. When you're in the garden, it's the sound of bugs and birds everywhere is such a rare experience in Johannesburg. And one which is really hard to replicate without the sort of knowledge that Patrick has of these local ecosystems. And I suppose a really great example of how greater diversity of botanical species can uplift the broader urban ecology of spaces. The estate's design really is not just functional, but it's deeply artistic. When Patrick looked at the Cape Dutch architecture of the main residence, he was inspired by its unique connection to the landscape. And when he was designing it, he looked to 17th century Dutch botanical still life paintings, which is quite a reference in landscape design. But these Dutch botanical still lifes differ quite largely from traditional still lifes, and that they're super delicate. So the focus of the garden became really about detail, and it's something that the garden owner really wanted as well. That as you would walk through, you'd have to bend low and look at these species that are quite difficult to spot in the wild, but in this garden, he's placed them close to the edges of the walkways so that you see them and really appreciate them. It's a sanctuary and a place where history, ecology, and art come together to make something really special. As the city continues to grow, Isibindi is quite a beacon of what you can do when you honor the past and then look to the future. And make a space that could really thrive for many generations to come. The next garden we're going to look at is Spier Estate in Stellenbosch. The property was established in 1692, and the garden is really one of the oldest gardens and oldest wine farms in the country. The property is celebrated not just for its wine, which is outstanding, but for fruit and grain crops and livestock. And now, thanks to Patrick's work restoring the landscape for its really stunning floriculture. The property attracts over 1 million visitors every year. So it's quite a heavy density and hard-working property. And in the book, we look into the gardens for the first time. For the first 2 decades of putting Spier together, Patrick led a large-scale restoration and conservation project. As you can see from this drone image, it's a really, really big project that extends further than just its public areas into, as you can see on the top left of this image, the Veld area, which is also just as extensive. On this project, Patrick worked alongside the project's head gardener, Wilton Sikwasana, who is really a champion of biodiversity and is such an extraordinary example of the commitment that each of these projects take to restore the landscape and really improve on what was often a degraded landscape. Wilson's worked with Patrick over almost 20 years, starting at what was at the time another really degraded landscape in the Seychelles at North Island, just off the coast of Mahé. At this project, Patrick's worked to integrate Spier's history with species indigenous to the area and established what are sustainable connections between the past and the future. One of the most remarkable moments of Spier happens at this time of year. And it's definitely something, if you've got the opportunity, that I would really recommend you try and get out there and see. Patrick, I think, has planted almost 800 Erythrina trees, these exquisite coral trees, and they are starting to bloom, and it's this feast of scarlet as you walk down this avenue that extends from the hotel to its restaurants. And it frames this story, as you can see, in the bottom right image that Spier calls their heritage walk. It's a walking route that takes visitors tells the story of over 3 centuries of South Africa's past, using these monumental sculptures that are interspersed with botanical signboards that offer an insight into the ecological restoration that Spier has undertaken over 2 decades. It's an ongoing initiative that is as educational as it is inspiring for many gardeners and people who visit the property. Firstly, let's just take a pause and look at how incredible the Veld area is. In here, Patrick has planted thousands and thousands and thousands of agapanthus that in late December and early January all flower at the same time. And it's just this extraordinary burst of color in what is quite a boring, bland landscape. And it's really, truly an experience that's hard to see elsewhere. When the current owners of Spier took over the property, the landscape was really degraded, with a lot of the locally indigenous vegetation lost to farming practices. There were many invasive species like Australian blue gums and wattles that had overrun the waterways and really threatened the landscape's future. So the project began with Patrick restoring the waterways. And today, the banks of Spiers River are abundant with riverine vegetation that's unique to the area. It includes species like the Breeda River yellowwood, the Cape willow, and wild peach trees that now are thriving along the riverside. And support a really diverse array of wildlife that is fantastic to see. But the restoration of the Spier landscape is, which you can really access via a footbridge that from the main property, features these kilometers of renosterveld and fynbos and indigenous vegetation that really celebrate the Cape floristic region. As many of you know, this region is the smallest but most diverse of the world's 6 floristic kingdoms and has become a biodiversity hotspot that Spier is helping to protect and restore. These are some of the incredible sculptures that you can experience in this grassland area. And it's these sorts of hard landscaping elements that I think connect Spier's more built interventions with the natural environment. As you can see here from above, you kind of get the sense of the work that Patrick's done. In the bottom right corner, you can see just a tiny portion of all of the aggies that Patrick's planted. This is the riverside that features plants like the blue water lilies and Cape pondweed. And it's really beautiful to spend an afternoon along the waterside where you can sit and watch the bird species that visit the lake. And you'll see beautiful, beautiful birds like the African spoonbill, which nests in the willow trees overhanging the lake. To connect the estate's past with its future, Patrick focused on the original Cape Dutch architecture and removed plants that weren't emblematic of the 17th century landscaping style. Here's another view of the extraordinary aggies. Yeah, so it's one example of how the project is really one example of how Spiers has approached conservation and has earned the project conservation champion status from the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Together with Wilton, Garden's really a testament to environmental stewardship. And they've created this really vibrant legacy for Patrick that's continuing today, that hopefully will educate future generations about how you can do this and do it beautifully. In the next garden, we go not far down the road to the village of Tulbagh, where Patrick and the owner of this incredible private garden, along with local landscaper and nurseryman Johan van Biljon of Intaba Landscapes, have transformed a former agricultural site in the lowlands into something that's really bursting with life. The landscape was really cultivated in the past by these fields and cattle herds that have now become a sanctuary for indigenous plants. The project began when Patrick and his team started this 750-meter long restoration of the river vegetation along the Breda River, which runs through the property. You can see a couple of the species here, like wild peach, wild olive, and the Cape holly. And it's really a thriving ecosystem today, and that's beautiful to experience. The property is about 24 hectares big, and the owner of this property is a really passionate environmentalist. He's a bird enthusiast, and he's also a plant collector. So the project began when the main residence was still under construction, and it was surrounded by weeds that were left over from its life as a wheat field. During the construction of the property, there was this wildflower in 2012 that burnt much of the vegetation and revealed the invasive species that had taken over the property. While at the time it was quite a devastating event for the owner of the property, it did allow the team to remove black wattles and pork jacksons and replace them with an indigenous seed mix that Patrick approved and worked on with Johan van Biljon. And today there's over 11,000 trees, shrubs, grasses, and bulbs that have been planted along this riverbank. And it's made quite a sanctuary for the family and for the wildlife that live there. To protect this property, Patrick planted a rectangular lawn that connected the site to the residence's courtyard-based architecture. It's surrounded by these perennial beds that were designed to create wildflower communities that are resistant to weeds and are self-renewing. So it kind of reinterprets the floral profile of the broader Tulbagh area. And the kind of dedication that the team has had to restoring the area has been really instrumental in seeing the return of plants like Babiana and other indigenous species. The owner is a collector of cycads, and obviously cycads live quite at odds with this Tulbagh landscape. And so Patrick created what he calls a cycad sculpture park that presents each of the cycads as a sculpture in its own right. And alongside this, Patrick also planted an extensive food garden that feeds not just the family, but the staff who keeps the property going. This is just a look at what it's like inside the sculpture garden, which is quite, I mean, I wouldn't call it, it is quite bizarre to see in Tulbagh, but I think it's an extraordinary moment in the garden. It's kind of the secret garden. It's just a look at the cover of the book, if you haven't seen it on shelves yet, and I hope it makes it easier for you to get your own copy. I'm gonna move. This is the couple kind of a few more views of what the property looks like. There's a beautiful pool surrounded by these Breda shale plants. I'm going to move on now to one of my favorite gardens in the book, which I suppose makes the argument that these projects don't have to be huge in order to make a difference. The property is based in Midrand, which is about halfway between Joburg and Pretoria. The area used to really have, I remember growing up in Johannesburg, there were these enormous fields of of the Highveld that as you drove through the area they were extraordinary. And over the past 2 decades, Midrand has become quite a dense residential hub with a lot of developments and shopping malls that have popped up. And so not much of that original landscape remains. But because of the work that Patrick and other landscapers are doing in the area, a pocket of quite a vulnerable biome is being preserved and revitalized. So the garden's about 8,000 square meters big, which I suppose isn't tiny, but it's nowhere near the scale of the other projects I've mentioned so far. And it sets up quite an intriguing juxtaposition between Johannesburg's grasslands and the mine dumps that surround the city. There are these massive mounds that you experience as you drive through Johannesburg, and they left quite a lasting mark on Patrick growing up in Johannesburg. So Patrick took inspiration from these mine dumps, and the mine dumps incorporate quite a characteristic 45-degree slope. And so Patrick looked at that as the starting point for the design of the garden. As you can see here and here, I mean, Elsa has done such an extraordinary job with these images. At the heart of the garden is a single species of grass, which is called the African weeping love grass, or we can use the nicer name, the Eragrostis curvula. It's quite a common grass in the area, but it's really resilient. And I think it kind of creates this feeling of a prairie garden, which connects really beautifully to the architecture of the space, which has been designed as a sort of prairie home. It also kind of references, you'll see that within the garden there are these mown paths and walkways that Patrick has placed in the garden to reference the golf courses that surround the property. So the garden is self-sustaining and self-regulating and isn't watered, aside from the golf grass that is planted in the walkways. So it's quite a climate-friendly and relatively affordable alternative to the other rose gardens and those sorts of gardens that exist in the area. The garden has been really successful since it was set up in Waterfall. And now what's amazing is that a lot of the other gardens, the newer gardens that are being built, are taking note from this garden and introducing the same idea in their own spaces. It's a beautiful opportunity that Patrick set up here to preserve the Highland Gardens and Highveld grasslands, and I suppose makes us think differently about how the spaces we create can have an impact on the environment. We're going to go back to Cape Town now and to the Western Cape and have a look at this 7,000 square meter garden that Patrick calls he refers to the style as a Cape Classic garden. It's about 7,000 square meters and it sits atop this hill in Bishop's Court. And in this garden, Patrick looked to a Japanese idea that's called shake, or borrowed scenery. And really the idea here is that Patrick wanted to celebrate the sunsets. So that's the main focus of the design in this garden, that it becomes an extraordinary place to maximize the view that the property has of the sunset. The design has these kind of quite carefully positioned pause points where you're able to appreciate the forest of Table Mountain and the Constantia Greenbelt. And yeah, really this garden isn't about just plants, but it's about creating this living, breathing canvas that interacts with the natural environment quite seamlessly, but also really intentionally. Once again, Patrick looked to the Cape Dutch Cape Dutch style architecture of the main residence and reinterpreted European classical garden design, but has used local plants for quite a distinct local twist on the theme. It has these quite dense, that you can kind of see from here, these dense tree plantings and wide lawns and slightly more organic geometries that are framed by these flower beds, where there's kind of a topiary here and there, but also have those incredible trees that are so emblematic of the Cape. The site faces west and is luckily wind-free, so he could really experiment more with species that were able to establish themselves in this quite moist soil and created these forest pockets throughout the garden. Obviously, this also works to screen the property from a main road that isn't seen quite clearly from this image, but it's kept the plants safe and given quite a lot of privacy to the owners. Patrick, quite uniquely, doesn't work from plans. And so this garden's a really incredible example of how he works on site with incredible craftsmen to craft the project and allow it to take shape as it's excavated into its own language. So it's quite a risk for an owner to take and really just allow Patrick to sense the property and connect to the landscape. But as you can see in this project, it results in some incredible moments. I'm going to quickly take you through a couple more gardens. We're running out of time, but just for you to get a big picture of the book, this is a garden in the Northwest Province. It's a Muti garden, which features a lot of medicinal plants that are very important to the community that call this area home. This is another garden also in Sandton, not far from Isibindi. It's breathtaking when you walk through the place. The garden, the owner of the garden has a really incredible collection of sculpture. And so the property's quite dramatic because the owner has a past, quite a theatrical past. His training was theatrical. And yeah, as you can see, it's the garden itself is quite sculptural. Obviously, some of Patrick's better known works is Sun City, which after almost 30 years is even more beautiful today. Still features these remarkable waterfalls and waterways, transplanted baobabs that Patrick salvaged as they were doing construction nearby. This is an overhead view that also took of North Island, which we were both really lucky to visit during the production of this book. The difficulty with photographing and writing about this garden is that they really weren't, the majority of the properties, it's quite hard to discern what Patrick has and hasn't done. So in this chapter of the book, we really look at built areas so that you can get a sense of what Patrick has and hasn't done. But it's enormous, and the work that Patrick set up almost 20 years ago continues today. The nurseries continue. A lot of the staff that started working on the property are still there. And it was an incredible night for Elsa and I when we stayed there. Then this is Nyrox, which many people who are from Johannesburg are really familiar with. It's a sculpture park. And so Patrick looked at this garden as an exploration of land art. And features these really dramatic grass mounds that become opportunities to display sculpture in a really powerful way. This is alongside Nyrox. There's a lot of private residences that are behind the property, and this is one of them that are incredible. The garden is almost archaeological in its approach to landscape design. And during the process of making these, Patrick was able to excavate large portions of the property and reveal these extraordinary geological specimens that are amazing to be around and see. It's just another view of Nyrox and how the sculpture interacts with Patrick's plantings. This is a view of another private property called Reflection that is alongside the property, alongside Nyrox. You drive in through this incredible driveway that just goes on, and it's between these lakes that are just, it's so contemplative, and the lakes kind of reflect the sky, and so you get the sense of being between water and the sky, and it's remarkable to be there. This is a stepwell that you walk alongside as you enter into the main residence. You can see that from this side as well. What's incredible about this chapter of the book is that Patrick didn't only design the landscape, but also designed the architecture of this house. Patrick looked to greenhouses as inspiration for the architecture. He worked with a lot of materials typical of greenhouse construction. The property is owned by one of Patrick's longtime landscaping partners, Ivan Roux. And as you can see from above, it's really extensive. The property is designed within a courtyard. You can kind of see in the bottom left here, the main house is surrounded by a wall, and it creates this kind of sense of being kind of in a village. That kind of curving shape between the three roofs is one passage, and the main living areas of the property extend off of that. This courtyard area also protects the homeowners from the wildlife that live in the area. Lower on the property, there are these incredible pause areas and entertainment areas. This is another quite dramatic property for the iStore in Sandton, where also the project works with sculpture in a really interesting way. This is an incredible grass lawn landscape. It's super minimal in Sandhurst in Johannesburg. And as you can see, the architecture is also really minimal. And so the property is really super geometric. And I mean, it's kind of only works with grass, but the moment is incredible when you're in there. This garden, we were given one day and a couple hours that we were allowed to photograph it. So it took us 2 years to photograph this garden. Outer flower, it's green and these various shades of green. But for this really magical moment, you get to experience thousands of clivias in flower, and it's just breathtaking to see it in flower. The owner is a surgeon who is one of the most prolific breeders and growers of clivia. So it's crazy, but it's amazing to visit. You can see here a few of the clivias that he grows. One of my favorite gardens from the book is a property called 27 Boxes in Johannesburg. It's a community park that was established in partnership with the developer. And Patrick calls this garden a pavement special. The garden is open to it's open for anyone to access. And so Patrick wanted to make a space where the plants were protected. So he walked around Melbourne and collected species that grew on the pavements and walkways around the suburb. And as you can see here, they beneath the kind of canopy of these wild peach, wild pear, and the jacarandas, it's just this burst of color and detail, and it's beautiful to experience. This is another property in Plett called Kloof that you can actually book to go and stay at. It's now operating as a retreat, but the property really it's super dramatic. A lot of what seems natural has been planted by Patrick, like these helichrysum. It's quite otherworldly. It feels like you're on Mars or, I don't know, some crazy place. But it's amazing to experience. And the Sustained City, which I mentioned earlier, this is the house of the owner who developed the property, Doosteen, which is, it's an out there idea. This is the aqueduct, those arches that you can see there that surround the main house. And then the last property I'm going to just quickly mention is this property in Llandudno in the Cape. The owners are quite passionate about jewelry, and so Patrick created this garden that's really, really kind of quite small plants. And yeah, it's about detail and fine geometries, and obviously the challenge with this garden is growing it so close to the waterside, close to the ocean. But it's an incredible space. Last thing I just want to quickly mention is that to kind of answer this idea of Patrick being an artist, we worked with an incredible painter and educator called Heidi Fourie, who went on these walks with Patrick to experience the landscape and then reinterpreted them in these oil on board paintings that feature throughout the book. Thank you. I hope that was interesting.
Wow, Garreth, thank you so much for sharing that look into what I can only imagine is a fantastic book. I think I'm going to put it into my cart immediately and pick it up from the bookstore tomorrow. So inspirational, and just what an unbelievable human to create that level of diverse landscape with clearly a signature and an absolute passion and unrivaled knowledge of the natural environment is just something. My inspiration bubble is full.
Oh, good.
I'd like to open up to welcome some questions. Please, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box and we'll have some questions and answers now. I've got just on a personal level, how did you meet Patrick and how did this relationship start that led to the book being made? Where did the inspiration come from?
I've been a journalist for really long, and I'm a design journalist, so a large part of my career has been about going to visit and interview and photograph some of the most beautiful properties in the country, houses and other properties. And really, it's almost impossible to escape Patrick's name when you're walking through these places. You see a really beautiful place and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And as you step into them, obviously the owner's like, oh, it's Patrick Watson Garden. And Patrick did this 25 years ago. And Patrick just did this. And so I had grown up with a really good friend who was connected to the family, and I managed to get an introduction to Patrick. And Patrick's not the sort of person who likes talking about himself. And so when I mentioned the idea of the book, he was really reluctant, but slowly I chipped away at him. And we managed to raise the funds to make this book from some of Patrick's really generous clients who felt as passionate as I did about celebrating his work and this tribute to him. So we managed to do the book.
Oh, well, from me, thank you. It's amazing. And
I hope that I think that the biggest hope is that for us that people like you, landscapers and other just people who are just passionate about plants are able to learn from this incredible man.
Yeah, the inspiration to be able to trust your gut and move off plan, and be in touch with what's going on each specific site and create something. I mean, it's such a diverse and completely unique across that range of projects. And as you say, that's a snapshot of 30 years worth of the work that he's done. So it's a real gift to have that presented for people. And then what would you how would you classify he won't talk about himself, how would you classify his contribution to landscape architecture or exterior design in the South African and worldwide context? How would you even, how does he position, what has he left for us, or what will he leave for us?
Totally. I mean, I think you and the rest of the landscaping community are very aware of this kind of trend at the moment. And I suppose I wouldn't call it a trend, but a natural evolution toward rewilding and these naturalistic landscapes. But a lot of the time, these landscapes are purely ornamental and decorative. And so I think what Patrick's work offers is a way to look at the ecological impact of planting these spaces and kind of approach the design and planting of these landscapes as something that exists within a much broader context and a broader environment. And hopefully they answer a question about how you can do it responsibly and I suppose remain a steward of that landscape that you've been given an opportunity to plant within.
Beautiful, thank you. And then just to pass on lots of thanks. Thank you for the talk. Thank you for the talk from everybody. And then one specific here, Romley has said, brought my copy. Elsa is my best school friend, so it'll be a treasured book always. Loved your insight and explanations. Thank you, Gareth.
Oh, cool, great. So happy.
And I think that sums it up for everybody from this talk. I want to thank you so much for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your passion, and thank you for sharing Patrick's work with us. And to all of our guests, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in a month's time for our next Wednesday talk. And Gareth, when you do your second book or have anything else to share for us, we'd love to have you back again. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Keep well, everybody. Pleasure, Gareth. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Belinda, behind the scenes. And we'll see you all in a month's time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.